In consideration of everybody who has showed up right on time, let's dive in and get started. We want to spend the first 45 minutes, Tanya, Kaydee, and I, spending about 15 minutes each talking about what we see as key pitfalls to sucking our energy away. So really speaking today on eating to run for energy. How is it that we can support as much energy as possible? So thank you for joining us today. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces. Hello, hello. This webinar is recorded, and I'll be sending out the recording tomorrow afterwards as well. So don't worry about frantically taking notes if you don't want to. So I'm Sarah, and I have Tanya and Kaydee with me here today, all holistic nutritionists, and we're going to dive into one topic each. Before we dive into our topics, I just want to say a little bit about energy. There's so many places, so many things that can take energy away from us, that can reduce our energy availability. And of course, I think as each one of us knows very, very well, we need to get enough sleep. So I'm just going to put that one out there, that each one of these nutritional things we're talking about doesn't make up for lack of sleep. Nothing can make up for lack of sleep. And certainly I've learned this, and I've had to learn it a couple times over to really believe it. But there is a minimum amount of sleep that each one of us needs, and it's different for each one of us. Right now, currently, I absolutely need 7.5 hours of good restful sleep per night. Otherwise, I'm going to need to nap in order to catch up on sleep. And I was just saying to Kaydee and Tanya before we began this call, I'm pregnant right now, and so my body is very tuned into how much sleep I need, and it makes me have a nap if I don't get enough. Whereas I found in the past, training hard, and for my athletes in general, we managed to somehow ignore our sleep deprivation, ignore the fact that we're tired. It becomes our new normal, and we just think that this tired state is what we ought to be in. It's our normal. And it's not. We want to feel good on a regular basis. So just landing on what your ideal number is, whether it's 7 or 7.5 or 8, or sometimes when we're in really heavy training cycles, it could be 8.5 or 9. That's actually totally common for athletes. And then on top of that, let's layer on these nutritional principles. So I'm going to pass it to Tanya to start us off with the first nutritional pitfall that we can find ourselves in.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name's Tanya, holistic nutritionist. As Sarah said, I'm also a multi-sport coach and a strength and conditioning coach. So what I am choosing to talk about, I see across all disciplines. And so I thought for my pitfall, I would talk about restricting calories for endurance athletes. And really what I'm talking about is energy availability. And so that's looking at energy coming in, energy going out. Not so much calories coming in, calories going out, because the quality or the type of calorie you're consuming, depending on what it is going to have a different value for you. So we're going to look at energy that comes in and the energy that you're expending. And so the energy that you're expending is your daily energy expenditure. And that's going to be different for everybody. We're going to look at your base metabolic rate or your resting metabolic rate, and then the energy that you're going to expend on top of that. And so your resting metabolic rate, this is what you need just to run your body. And so if you're lying on the couch, you don't even get to watch Netflix. You're just staring at the ceiling. You can't even push the button. You're just lying there, breathing, staring at the ceiling. You have a certain amount of energy that you need just to run your body and make that happen. And that's going to make your heart beat, your lungs function, your kidneys function, your endocrine system work, your hormones to move. You have to give your body that much energy in to make that happen. And that's just to survive. And then if you actually want to watch the Netflix show, or maybe get up and go to the fridge and get some food to eat, or digest the food that you're eating, that's going to require some more energy. So your daily energy expenditure is going to go up. And so we're just talking now about running your body and maybe moving through space. We're not actually exercising yet. That's going to be about 60 to 80% of your daily energy expenditure just to function. And then you start adding in exercise, and it could be you go for a swim in the morning, and then you go to work, and then you go for a run in the afternoon or the evening. Every time you add on another activity, your daily expenditure goes up. And what we want to pay attention to is the amount of nutrition that you take in, which is your intake, and the amount of energy that you put out with functioning your body and then doing some kind of activity. We want to make sure that that number, your intake minus your output, stays positive. You want to have a positive value at the end. That value is your available energy. And I know that sounds a little bit scary because we don't want to have an excess. You don't have to have a ton of energy, but you still want that number to be positive so you have the energy. Because if you don't, there's going to be some consequences, and I'm going to go over that in a second. What's going to happen if you have a low energy state over a long period of time? So it's going to happen every once in a while. You don't eat enough, you work out a little bit more, like things happen. It's no big deal. Our bodies can roll with it. It's all right. But if it's consistent, you're consistently having low energy left over, what's going to happen is you're going to have metabolic suppression. So your thyroid is going to down regulate, and then that's going to have your metabolism also down regulate. And so that's not a really great place. We don't want to be there. If your metabolism decreases, you're again not going to have a lot of energy, and you're not going to be able to move your body composition to the way that you likely want it to be, which is maybe why you thought about going for calorie restriction in the first place. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward. There's a couple ways that you can get into a low energy state. If you're constantly having a little bit of low energy availability, you also run the risk of decreasing your hormone function, decreasing bone formation. You have higher stress reactions. And for women, you could run to the position where you have no period anymore. And so that's not a great place to be either. Interestingly, after 4 days of low energy availability, that's when your thyroid's going to start to downregulate. And so if a strategy that you've employed or have heard works well, and we've been bombarded by this method of reduce your calories in and increase your exercise as the way to lose weight or to change your body composition. For as long as I can remember, that's been a message that has been presented as that's how you lose weight. 4 days of being at a low energy state, you start to downregulate your thyroid, and that's going to slow the whole process down. So it doesn't take too long to start impacting you. And as an athlete, you have to consider the food that you're taking in, but also we work out a lot. So you're looking at the amount of energy that you're expending. You want to have the energy to do your activity, but you need to be aware of the amount of activity that you're doing, and are you feeding yourself enough to do that activity, plus support your whole body to just function and be happy. Because we want happy bodies because they're going to do the good things for us, like run really far or fast or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. How this can happen, 2 ways. You've chosen to restrict calories, or you've chosen to go for more activity than you're consuming or intaking energy for. Or sometimes it's happened because as we increase volume or intensity, you often don't feel like eating. If you've gone for a really hard workout, I know I'm not hungry right away afterwards. And so you might not have the hunger cue that's telling you to eat food. And so you're just going to carry on with the rest of the day. You're doing the best you can, and you might slowly slip into this low energy state. So it can absolutely happen unintentionally. So it's good to be aware of how you might feel if you're in this state for a long period of time. And so what you might notice if you're at a low energy availability state is that you're going to have a decreased endurance performance. If you don't have the energy, you can get away with a few workouts, that's going to be fine, but over time you're just not going to be able to perform the way you want to. And we worked really hard in training. We try so hard and we hit our targets and we get up early and we do all of these things to make it happen. And you could actually be doing yourself a disservice if you're not getting the fuel, the intake, the daily energy that comes in to support that. And I'm sorry, my cats are not really doing their thing, of course. Just one sec. Hey, what's enough? You might notice that you can not hit your targets. Is this really annoying? Are you guys fine? Give me a thumbs up if this is okay. All right. You're not going to hit your watts on the bike. You might notice that your heart rate is not appropriate for what it should be for the effort that you're expending. So it's important to pay attention to that. You might see that cardiac drift is happening sooner. So as endurance athletes, the longer you're out there, you start to have a little bit higher heart rate. That's normal. But if you're not having enough energy, that's going to start happening sooner and sooner. So it's important to pay attention to that. It could be a red flag for you. You might notice that you're not recovering well and you're not adapting to your training. And that sucks because, again, we're working so hard. We want to adapt. That's why we're doing all of the effort to adapt, get stronger, be faster, be better. You might be also flatlining in your training. You're doing all the work. Things seem to go really well, but you're not progressing. You're not getting any farther. You're plateauing. So that could be, again, you just don't have the resources either for the energy to do the work or most likely the energy to do the internal repair from the work. You could find that you're in a position of bone stress issues, injuries, so stress fractures. That could be a little bit because you don't have the resources to have the good foundation for bone structure. Likely there's potential for infections, you're getting sick more often. So just paying attention to those signs. And I think this one is really important. There's a strong potential for gut malfunction. And so this could be you're not digesting well, maybe you're bloated, you're gassy, now you're struggling with IBS symptoms. This is a problem. This is going to be a cascade effect of even if you now are eating all those good foods to support your activity, you might not be absorbing them. And so that's then going to perpetuate that low energy state because you're not actually absorbing the nutrition that you're eating. And so you really want to pay attention. We want to get ahead of it before it gets to this place, because this is going to require some work to be able to get out of if you're already at the digestive distress stage. If it goes really far, if you've now been in a chronic low energy state for a long time, you actually might not have any hunger cues anymore. Or they're going to come at really the wrong time. You're not hungry all day and then you're ravenous when you should be ready to go to bed. And so your hunger cues are wrong. Again, that's just going to facilitate that cascade effects of you not getting in the calories that you need. You're not choosing to. Now it's just your body's not functioning properly. And that's when it leads to REDS. And that's relative energy deficiency in sport. And that's when almost every system in your body is now impacted by that energy deficit. So what can you do? Well, you can try to get ahead of it before this happens. And so great, we're now discussing it now. So that's check mark number 1, you're taking the steps. Looking at your training, look at the volume that you're doing, look at the type of training that you're doing, the intensity, and take the time to feed yourself for that activity. If you take away looking for specific, maybe like body composition changes, and focus on fueling for your activity, it might be a little bit easier to get that type of nutrition in, because often as athletes, we're goal focused and have this outcome that we're trying to achieve. And if I want to achieve performance, I can just put that, like, I have to hit this many watts on the bike, I have to eat this for my breakfast. And it just kind of put it in the list of tasks that need to be accomplished to achieve that goal. It could be a great start. If you're not particularly food motivated and eating isn't great for you, then that might be an option to accomplish that. If you think about eating balanced meals, so having your protein, your carbs, and your fats in a balanced meal, and then having lots of variety in your diet, you're going to be able to get in all of the nutrients and nutrition that you need, your protein, fats, carbs, and then all of the micronutrients that run all of the physiological processes that we demand our body to do as endurance athletes. And then really dial in your nutrition for pre, during, and post workouts. If that's the only time that you're really focused, that's the window I would appreciate you to care about and feed that window. Feed before, feed during, feed after, deal with the rest later if you have to. Start there, start small. Sarah and Kaydee did an amazing presentation that's on the Eat2Run YouTube page that has a video with how to do that. I have a video covers the same thing. We're all on the same page when it comes to this discussion on how to fuel for sport. I have a video on my website as well. There's lots of resources that we would happily work with you. If you need some help, you can reach out to each of us, and we'll be able to guide you on the specifics, because that's going to be an individual process. But it's important to be aware that you need to care about this and get ahead of it before you get into that depleted state. Sorry, I went over time. I can't help myself. Obviously, I'm a little bit passionate. If you have any questions, if you want to just throw them into the chat box function, and we'll answer all of the questions at the end of the presentation. So anything now, go ahead, throw it in the chat box. And then when we do get to the end, we'll answer those first, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and you guys can just come on and ask questions live. That is what I have to say for today. And I think now we're on to Kaydee.
Thanks, Tanya.
My pleasure.
So my name is Kaydee. Hi, guys. I am a sports nutritionist as well, holistic sports nutritionist. And I am going to be talking about how carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates especially, can be an energy zap for us. Now, don't get your panties in a twist, because carbohydrates are needed for athletes and runners and everything. I'm going to get into that. But I briefly wanted to start with glucose, because, you think about carbohydrates, I immediately think of blood sugar. And so I wanted to make a note too about ketone bodies are also an energy source that the body can use. But that's a different topic. But I wanted to add that in there. I'm just going to be talking about glucose and how carbohydrates can impact that and can cause some fatigue and energy zaps. So blood glucose, I'm sure you guys already know this. I'll just do a brief synopsis on what it is. So glucose is absolutely necessary for energy in our bodies. We need glucose for all of the cells in our bodies. It's used to make something called ATP, which is basically just energy. We need glucose to be able to repair our muscle tissues. We need it for our brain functioning, immune system, nervous system. It is just a very important thing to have in our bodies. Without it, we would not be alive. But the importance of it is we need to make sure our levels are balanced. If they're too low or too high, you can run into a lot of trouble. Now, another important thing to mention with glucose is insulin. So insulin is a protein that is created in the pancreas. You need insulin to be able to for glucose to be able to actually get into your cells to create the energy, to create the energy that your body needs to carry out the processes to keep yourself alive. So when insulin is stimulated by blood glucose levels rising, So let's say you eat a high carbohydrate meal, your insulin levels are going to rise, your blood glucose levels are going to rise. And this is not a bad thing necessarily, but if your blood sugar levels are consistently high, that comes with, you know, a standard American diet where you're consuming a lot of carbohydrate rich foods, particularly in the form of refined carbohydrates. And I will define that in a second. Your blood glucose levels will remain consistently high, and so will your insulin, which can lead to insulin resistance. This can lead you to something called a blood glucose roller coaster. And I'm sure you have all experienced it. Like if you have, let's just pick a nice refined carb, like a bowl of Cocoa Puffs for breakfast, okay? You get that sugar rush, high carbohydrates, and then you feel that crash, right? You feel that energy crash and like kind of zapped. Your insulin is going to be secreted. It's going to leave you feeling miserable, right? And then you're going to feel hungry. And what do? You're going to crave more carbs and more sugar. So this is the blood glucose. It's called like blood glucose dysregulation, but this roller coaster cycle of this happening over time is what can cause a lot of systemic inflammation. It can cause fatigue. It can lead to other health issues. So it's something that you don't want to be constantly on. You want to make sure you're in a maintained balance. So talking about refined carbs, carbohydrates is a really large category of foods. I mean, a piece of chocolate cake, a piece of bread, a donut are carbohydrates, but also vegetables are. A stalk of broccoli, sweet potato, asparagus, dark leafy greens. These are also going to be in the carbohydrate category. Essentially, every plant-based thing could be considered in the category of carbohydrates, but they behave differently in the body. So that's important to remember. Your highly refined and highly processed carbohydrates are going to be stripped of nutrients. That's why, like when you read let's just say a loaf of bread, they have to fortify it back in with vitamins and minerals because it's so processed. They strip it out in the production of these types of foods. They also contain a lot of sugar, usually a lot of added sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and white flour. Also white sugar though. Anyway, yeah. So again, like these foods are highly inflammatory, and they can also lead you to go into these highs and lows of the sugar, blood sugar roller coaster, which does not make you feel great. High insulin also, if you have a consistently high blood sugar load, you also have high insulin, and this can increase inflammation. Excuse me. High glucose load foods. Sarah just came out with a really great newsletter and/or blog post about metabolic efficiency, and she has an excellent list of high and low glycemic load foods. So take a look at that, and that can be a great reference to what I'm talking about after we are finished here tonight. But again, these high glycemic load foods, like your donuts, your breads, your pastas, these refined carbohydrates, can have a greater impact on your blood sugar and insulin levels. If you're eating a lot of these highly processed foods as part of your diet and snacks and meals, it's going to leave room for more or less room for nutrient-dense foods. And I'm going to get into those in a second on what foods I recommend that are carbohydrate-rich but nutrient-dense. I also wanted to mention, if you're somebody that is feeling like you are incredibly tired all the time, you're zapped, you have no energy, you may have some GI distress. Something also that is found in highly refined processed foods is gluten. Now, I know this can sometimes in the nutrition world be a controversial thing. People say gluten-free is a trend, all of that, but there is a lot of science that backs up that gluten is a very inflammatory food. It's actually a protein that is found in wheat, and it also does something in your gut that is pretty interesting. So gluten stimulates a protein in your gut called zonulin. Now, this protein is responsible for keeping the tight junctions in your gut closed. So if you think of it, I like to make this analogy. Like you want your gut lining to be of good integrity. You want your gut lining to be tight and not open like this. So what gluten can do is cause some inflammation, and it can dysregulate zonulin. So what happens is your tight junctions go from this to this. So when that happens, that means anything you consume can go straight into your bloodstream. Now, larger particles can cause the stuff that's not meant to be in your bloodstream can get in your bloodstream because of those open junctions from the zonulin. So that also can cause systematic inflammation, and can also lead to chronic fatigue and other health issues too. So that's something to keep in mind, is something called leaky gut if you are having energy zap and GI distress or anything like that. So back on the topic of running and carbohydrates. Now, higher carbs pre-post workout are optimal for enhancing performance and for recovery. So it's not that carbohydrates are bad, but they're just misused and overconsumed. And those highly refined carbohydrates are meant to do that. Sugar, when they add sugar into something, it is meant to be overconsumed. So that can also lead to the feelings of fatigue, the energy crashes. So how do you do nutrient timing? So the best time, I kind of like to call it, this is not a scientific term at all, but like a carb sandwich. You want to put your carbohydrate-rich foods pre and post a high intensity workout and or a long run or a long cycle or whatever your sport is. The muscles at this time are ready to soak up the glycogen. They're ready to help you perform in your workout. And then after your workout, your muscles actually can take up more glucose. So that's the time to really reload up and get that glycogen back in. And also another important part of the post-workout is carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen reserves, but also protein, because you're damaging some of the muscles while you are doing those intense workout. You want to make sure you're adding protein as well. So it is important to consume those carbohydrates, but make sure you're doing it ideally around a vigorous workout, high intensity, quality session, whatever you call it. Make sure you're sandwiching pre and post around those workouts. So what to do? Carbs that I like, that I highly recommend, and I know Sarah and Tanya do, are going to be plant-based carbs. They're also going to have more nutrients in them that are healing rather than harmful. So if you think of the refined carbohydrates, they have all those other ingredients in there, like high fructose corn syrup, sugar, white flour, all the things that are inflammatory, while you have plant-based, like getting your carbohydrates from a vegetable source that also come with antioxidants, phytochemicals that are anti-inflammatory. They're almost medicinal, if you want to say. They're good for fighting inflammation. So those type of foods are going to be the ones that you want to be consuming regularly. These are also going to be called low glycemic, meaning they're not going to have that huge impact on your blood sugar and your insulin. So they kind of keep them more balanced. And again, they come with added nutrients, fiber, and phytochemicals. So these low glycemic load vegetables are easily or slowly digested, and they don't, like I said, they don't lead to the blood sugar and insulin spike. Excuse me. If you want to know more about that, please check out Sarah's series on metabolic flexibility and efficiency, because it outlines this very beautifully, probably a lot better than I can say. But again, the majority of your diet should be coming from foods rich in fiber, dark leafy greens, fruits. I like berries, oranges, veggies, whole grains around your vigorous workouts. And always remember to include healthy fats as well, and good quality protein to keep the balance. So, well, I didn't really check the time, so.
You're bang on.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Tanya. And thank you for the questions, everyone. We are going to get to them. I would just like to present what I find a nutritional pitfall to be. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, you will not be surprised when you hear me say this. I have literally been saying this for the past decade. From the moment I entered the world of nutrition, I saw this as a major, major pitfall. But it is no less pervasive today, a decade later, than it was when I began. And I still see it show up in client journal after client journal after client journal, even in those who are really, really trying hard. So for some of you, this might be something to pay attention on. As for some of you, you might actually have got this one. So here we go. If there is one thing that there was only one thing that I could change, and we would all be so much healthier and have so much more energy for it, it would be to get rid of every single industrial seed oil that is out there. There are a couple different names for industrial seed oils: polyunsaturated vegetable oils, processed cooking oils, or I'm just simply going to refer to them as industrial seed oils. I'm just going to pop the brief list of them in the chat because there's a lot, but they include canola, corn, cottonseed, soybean, safflower, sunflower, peanut oils, almost every single processed cooking oil that you can think of. So they're in there for you. And there are 5 reasons why these are not a good idea for us to reach for. Most of these reasons are because it causes systemic chronic inflammation in the body. And when we have this low-grade systemic inflammation in our body, what's the first symptom we get? Fatigue. We're tired. We feel it. It's just this low-level fatigue, just like the low-level systemic inflammation that is in our bodies. Some of us, when we start to eat a lot healthier, we become very sensitive to this. So we might eat really, really well most of the time, avoiding these processed cooking oils. And then all of a sudden we'll indulge in a bag of chips. And that's totally fine. I still do that too. Although it's interesting, since I'm pregnant, all of these foods are they're out. There's no question about it. But that's really the first time in my life. But I would notice it if I was to indulge. Then I would almost immediately notice this kind of, my energy would go down almost immediately, and definitely a few hours later into the next day. For many of us, it's simply, we don't even notice it. It's kind of our normal. So number 1, it's an evolutionary mismatch. All of these processed cooking oils really only came into the picture in the 1900s, early 1900s. There was William Procter and James Gamble, Procter and Gamble. They made soaps, and they recognized that they could use vegetable oils to make cheaper soap. And then they recognized they could hydrogenate them and make it into Crisco and make a killing off of it, which they did. We all know now that Crisco is really, really, really terrible for us. But for some reason, to this day, there is still an argument out there. There's still advice being given out there that processed cooking oils are actually still the healthier option. I truly believe that not to be true. If you Google processed cooking oils inflammation, the first article that pops up says processed cooking oils are not inflammatory. And I mean, I think that's going to be the message that's out there for years to come. But we do know now, really in the 2000s, 2014, there's this great meta-analysis that actually shows us that there is no benefit to reducing saturated fats. There is no benefit to increasing polyunsaturated fatty acids when it comes to things like heart disease and chronic inflammatory diseases. That all of this advice that really we started being given in the 1940s, which by the way is when the American Heart Association was formed, and these cardiologists received $1.5 million from Procter and Gamble and other sources to start giving the public advice that processed cooking oils was the way to go and to avoid animal products. So there's the whole political scene behind the curtain that I won't get into. But at the end of the day, we were not made to be eating these oils. We were made to be eating what we've been eating for centuries, which I'll get into near the end. Number 2, processed cooking oils gives us this huge imbalance between omega-6s and omega-3s. So in an ideal world, all of the polyunsaturated fatty acids that we're consuming, omega-6s and omega-3s, are in this lovely balance of 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. But in reality, what we see today, because as a society we consume so many processed cooking oils, we happen to be taking omega-6s to omega-3s more in a 10-to-1 or all the way up to a 20-to-1 ratio. And this causes systemic inflammation in the body. And this high intake of omega-6 fatty acids combined with the low omega-3 intake, it really just produces a state of chronic inflammation that produces fatigue as the first symptom, but then down the road will create many numerous chronic diseases. I actually love the fact that it produces fatigue as the first symptom. Fatigue is this symptom that our body gives us to say, hey, hello, something's not right. Can you please troubleshoot? And it gives us this opportunity to go inward and look at what is the underlying cause, what's happening, what am I doing that's not quite working for me? And we get to address it now before it turns into this chronic condition down the road that's going to be so much harder to take care of. So in that respect, as annoying as fatigue can be, believe you me, I know, I always try to see it as this symptom, this way that my body's communicating with me. So that's a big one there. Some processed cooking oils, for example, canola oil, are actually higher in omega-3s. And so in some cases, this doesn't apply to every single oil, which is one of the reasons why canola oil has been touted as healthy. Still not healthy though, because other reasons. Number 3, these oils are highly unstable. They have been highly processed. And therefore this very delicate fatty acid, which ought not to be exposed to oxygen, to light, and to heat, has been exposed to all 3. And in this case, very, very high heats in order to process them, to squeeze them out of, like when you think of a sunflower seed or a soybean or a corn, can you imagine trying to squeeze it yourself to get the oil out of it? It wouldn't work. So they need to go through these highly industrialized processing, which destroys the integrity of the fatty acid. So now you're dealing with an oxidized fatty acid. It's a damaged fatty acid, which creates free radicals when we put it into our bodies and damages our own healthy cells, unfortunately, causing inflammation. Number 4, genetically modified. The majority of these oils are genetically modified, and we just don't know enough about genetically modified foods. I personally am convinced that they're also causing inflammation in the body. And number 5, these oils are repeatedly heated. In fact, they're advertised to us as good sources to use under high heat. And really, the more times you just heat these oils, and especially when you think about the deep fryers in the restaurants, it just continues to destroy the integrity of the fatty acid. Not only are all of the vitamin E, so important for us and found in nuts and seeds, completely destroyed in the oils, unlike olive oil, which still has vitamin E, it will actually reduce the amount of vitamin E found in our own bodies. And that is to our detriment, because we need our vitamin E in order to keep us healthy in all the running and cycling and whatever activity that we're doing. That requires a certain amount of vitamin E. So for those 5 reasons, I would try to avoid it as much as possible. And in this day and age, what you're going to find is that not only are we looking to not buy those bottles of oils and bring them into our homes, but also the processed foods that we see on the shelves. These oils are pervasive. They are in, even if you shop at Whole Foods and Choices, you will pick up many of the items on the shelves and find that canola oil, sunflower oil is in there. And unfortunately, it's always going to be the best choice to make your own products at home. There are some products that are coming out with coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil. That's wonderful. Look for those. And if you just can't find them, then the solution is probably going to be making your own foods at home. At the end of the day, one thing I did want to touch on before looking at, okay, well, where do we go? What do we choose instead? How do we avoid these processed cooking oils, these industrial seed oils? We have known for a long time that processed cooking oils cause inflammation. And we know that chronic low-grade inflammation in the body causes fatigue. So a 2018 publication in Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience confirms that fatigue is a common symptom of low-grade chronic systemic inflammation. But to this day, it's still unclear what the mechanism is. How does that inflammation jump to fatigue? And the authors of this particular publication propose, their model is really that chronic low-grade inflammation leads to reduced cellular energy availability. And so just like Tanya was talking about earlier, when we don't have enough energy available to our bodies to use, we're going to run into trouble real quick. And what appears to be happening is it's like there's this metabolic switch that's flipped. So this low-grade inflammation induces the metabolic switch from being energy efficient and being able to use all the good food we put in our bodies and use it for energy. And it flips it over to this fast-acting, less efficient energy production, which actually gets into what Katie was talking about, this fast-acting, raise the blood sugar levels really quickly and then plummet them down just as fast. So what we end up seeing is that low-grade inflammation leads to fatigue by increasing reactive oxygen species, causing inflammation. These are free radicals that damage our cells. And it also reduces insulin sensitivity, which is going to get us into trouble also. These effects combined result in reduced energy availability and therefore reduced cellular energy, the end result we're actually looking for. So what do we turn to instead? How do we avoid all these processed cooking oils? Like Tanya and Katie both already alluded to, we don't have to be perfect all of the time. You can, and with sleep, you can miss out on sleep one night, you actually will be okay. You can miss out on a day of getting in all your required calories. You're going to be okay as long as you pay attention to them the next day. You know, you can eat that sugary donut once in a while. Your body's going to bounce back. Same with processed cooking oils. Going out to somebody's house to eat, going out to a restaurant, don't fret, don't worry about it. Our bodies are resilient. You can bounce back from the once in a while. I always like to apply the 80-20 rule to basically everything, the way we train, how we eat. But it's really, if you can really focus 80% of the time or more on making sure that you are, when you're home, when you have control over your foods, that you're choosing all of these high quality fats, high quality foods, nutrient dense foods. And then the best thing you can do for yourself is when you're in a situation where you don't want to worry about food, you want to enjoy yourself, you're going to somebody's house, they're cooking for you, just enjoy yourself. Don't allow the stress of, oh my gosh, did they use processed cooking oils to interfere or affect how you're feeling. Stress in the body is a whole nother story we could get into. That also causes fatigue. But for the most part, where you do have control, and hopefully it's 80% or more, then choose, and I'll put it into the chat here, the healthy cooking fats. So really when we look to vegetable oils, what we're doing is cooking with them or baking with them. And so here is a list of alternative, so healthy cooking fats, traditional fats, as well as other healthy fats that we want to be reaching for. And this really includes extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil. I would add avocado oil to the list as well, relatively newer on the scene, but it is also a monounsaturated fat, just like virgin olive oil is. And there are some wonderful mayonnaises that have been made with avocado oil. So Primal Kitchen is a great brand that makes a great mayonnaise. Things that I had completely I will never have that again. And unless I make it myself, which, you know, as much as I'm a proponent for making everything ourselves, we do have limited time, and mayonnaise is something I have never made. So there are options out there on store shelves that are made with these healthy fats that we can find: grass-fed butter, ghee, and pastured lard, duck fat, tallow. These very more ancient forms of fat are actually the healthier fats to reach for when cooking. And then, of course, other healthy fats that we want to make sure that we're getting into our diet on a regular basis: avocado, olives, nuts, seeds, coconut, cacao, chocolate, grass-fed meats, grass-fed cheeses, yogurts, kefirs, wild fatty fish. There's lots to choose from, in other words, when we're looking for healthy fats. And kind of as a final note, as I wrap up, just noting that as important as carbohydrates are for fueling our running, our biking, our swimming, whatever our sport may be, healthy fats are also so important. And these unfortunately are since the 1940s and Ansel Keys came on the board and advocated for low fat, we've been afraid of them for many, many years. And to this day, I work with many clients who are still quite afraid of getting enough fats into their diet. And that has run us into many, many problems and issues when it comes to our hormonal health, cardiovascular health, all the systems of our body health. And we want to see, more than likely, what I see for my clients, we want to see as a percentage of our diet, anywhere from 35 to 50% of our diet comes from healthy fats. It could be more, probably not less, but about 35 to 50%. And if we are currently experiencing some sort of a health condition, especially hormonal condition, probably upwards of somewhere in the 40s% up to 50%. So just a final note on how important it is to get enough fat into the diet. But I never want to just say fat, because there's such a huge distinction between fats we want to avoid and then the actual healthy fats we want to be reaching for. So with that, I am going to open it up to questions. I noticed there's some questions in the chat, so just going to go up. So do you recommend macro counting for athletes? I'm going to pass that one, I think, to Tanya.
Yeah, I do actually recommend counting your macros. I think that that's an easier way to start than focusing on counting calories. You could use an app like MyFitnessPal or something like that to track your macros, but do not pay attention to their calorie recommendations, because that's going to put you in a deficit right away. So I do appreciate using something like that to track your macros, but it's going to be individual for what you're trying to achieve, where you are in your health journey, where you are in your fitness journey, of what that ratio is going to look like. So I can't give you those numbers in this conversation. That's something that we could do individually, but I do think that it's a great place to start. Primarily, and I think there's another question, specific fueling for perimenopause. But I think for perimenopause, menopause, but definitely also for all athletes, I think the primary focus in your macro count should actually be protein. Hit your protein targets and then build out your fats and carbohydrates after that. If all you could pay attention to, for what I think is the primary, is to nail that protein macro and then go from there. But that would be a conversation that would be based on individual, what your goals are, your current fitness level, and what you're trying to achieve from looking at your macros. Kaydee or Sarah, do you have anything to input on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Tanya. I think it can be very useful information to count your macros and make sure you're obviously fueling enough, fueling appropriately for your specific sport and recovery. I found it's very individualized, like Tanya said. I found with the majority of my clients, though, they don't want to count macros. A lot of them have struggled with like eating disordered and disordered eating in the past. And so I'm really helping them with intuitive eating and learning how to listen to hunger cues and all that. So I think there is absolutely 100%. It's an individualized thing, and there's a time and a place for counting macros. But I've just found with the majority of my athletes, I'll have them do a food log so I can see their trends and see if they're under eating and stuff, but they don't want to see any of the numbers because it kind of wigs them out. So I get it from that perspective too. So I just wanted to add that in there as well.
No, great point.
I agree with you, Tanya. I agree with you.
No, that's a really great point. We do need to take care for not all of the things that we've talked about. We don't want to create disordered eating. We're all trying to fuel our bodies and to play hard in the activities that we're trying to accomplish. So that's why I believe that it's not something that we can put a general statement out. And these conversations do need to get to be an individual conversation of where you're trying to go, what you're trying to achieve. And maybe as the practitioner, we'll be the ones counting the macros to make sure that the numbers are being hit. But it is something that needs to be someone needs to look at it, whether it's the athlete or the practitioner.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would just add to that. And that's how I work with my athletes is I tell them not to worry about the numbers. Don't worry about macro counting. You don't do anything. Let me, I'll do it. So I'll do it in the background and I'll give them a menu example that hits those targets. Here, all you have to do is follow, eat these foods in these approximate amounts. And so if you don't have somebody you're working with, do it for yourself. Figure out how much protein, how much fat you want to be hitting in a day, how many carbohydrates, and just give yourself a few menu examples. And that's pretty much all you need. You don't have to go into obsessive macro counting on a daily basis. For me, I would say it's probably never. Always do it in advance and then follow the menu example, but everybody's different. And then we have another question. Is glucose the best simple carb for menopausal athletes rather than fructose, etc.? Did you want to take that on Katie?
I'm going to get Tanya's in on this.
Yeah, let's volley that one around.
That's a whole section on menopause and perimenopause. So
I think that the way I would prefer to approach this question is you need to look at what you can digest and what you can process and where you're at within your body and where you are in your hormone changes. If you're full menopausal or if you're peri, this says menopausal, but I'm also going to mention peri. When you've got the fluctuation of your hormones, that's a stressful situation. And so that can actually impact your digestive ability quite a bit. So you want to be able to be consuming foods that you can actually digest and absorb. And also when you're in menopause, you still might be having some of those, like some of the stress is still continuing. It's not just that one day when menopause is one moment in time and then it's post. All of that stress doesn't just go away. And so I would look at your simple carbohydrates. I'm assuming you're talking about what you want to consume before, during, and after your activity. I would go with a combination of nutrition of like oats and raisins and something else. So you've got some energy right away and you've got some long lasting energy. And then during your activity, what can you digest to be able to perform well? That might be different for me, it might be different for you of what you can actually process. And then how much of that you're going to be taking on. Are you talking about for a 2-hour event? Or are you talking about a 10-hour event? Because that might dictate some differences in what you're able to take on and actually process. That might just change with what your guts are actually able to tolerate. So I think that might be like you doing some work on what you've taken in the past and how you felt. And you might find that you're quite sensitive to fructose. That can be a bit of an issue for some endurance athletes. And you may need to look at some different options, but some people might be fine with it. So again, it's a little bit of an individual thing that's going to take a little bit of strategizing and work and a conversation. Do either of you guys have anything to add to that?
No, that says it. Actually, Tanya, do you want to take the next question too?
Is there anything specific to fueling and nutrition that an athlete in perimenopause should be doing? Specific, I think that if you could focus on one thing, it's going to be focusing on getting your protein. When you're in perimenopause, you still have hormones available to build muscle. And so you want to utilize this time in your life to build as much muscle as you can, because once you get into menopause, you don't have estrogen to drive that metabolic process or to drive that process. You can still build or maintain muscle, but you're going to have to use brute force and muscular contraction to be able to have those, to maintain the muscle that you have. So I would focus on consuming the adequate amount of protein for your activity level while you have the hormones to use that protein to build muscle. So it's going to take some strength training as well. That would be my main focus right now. And if you have any body composition changes that you might like to drive to a more muscular situation versus body fat, this would also be the time that I would do it again while you have the hormones to help you drive those processes. You can, in perimenopause, still have in menopause, have absolute control over changing body composition if that's something you're trying to do. It just takes a little bit more brute force and work. And so you want to do that as much now while you're in perimenopause and still have the hormones to help that process. Hope that helps you out a little bit. Next Sounds question. I'm not answering that one. I think it's for Katie.
Yeah, that one's for Katie.
Okay, sourdough. Oh, I like sourdough bread. So if you do not have a celiac, I would say absolutely sourdough bread. Sourdough bread still contains gluten. So if you do have celiac, it would be something you would have to avoid. But in saying that, sourdough does contain less gluten because it's been fermented. It also has a lower glycemic load, which means it's not gonna cause that drastic spike in blood glucose levels and insulin. It also, so then your blood sugar levels are gonna be more stabilized. It also is gonna provide an excellent source of fiber, which is good for your gut microbiome. And as we know, a healthy gut is overall a healthy body. And the benefits, so I just learned this actually today. So this is an interesting question about sourdough that I got. So sourdough bread, people say it's probiotic. Well, actually it starts as probiotic because it's fermented. But then in the baking process, the bacteria dies off. But the lactic acid that is created by the bacteria is still beneficial to you when you consume it. So it still is considered healthy for your gut microbiome as well. So yeah, it is great. If you have celiac, it still has gluten, so probably not, but it is lower in gluten content because it is fermented. So it's, yeah, fantastic to eat. Good for you. Around vigorous workout.
Yes. Yeah. No, that is one of the breads that I'm quick to recommend around workouts. If you're looking for an easy to digest bread, you really like your toast before going for your workout. I have some clients who, there's no getting rid of their toast, and that's okay. And so they're choosing a really good traditional sourdough bread that actually uses the bacterial culture. There's fake sourdoughs out there, so just beware of those.
And she said homemade too, so that's good. Like, just be careful too, like when you're checking for the added sugars or any type of added fillers that they might put in at the grocery store or something. But yeah, homemade, absolutely great.
Awesome. Well, I think that takes care of all the questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question they want to pop on and actually ask? Any other questions? No more questions. Well, we are right at the top of the hour, so beautiful timing.
We nailed it.
Right? It was so wonderful to have each one of you with us. Thank you for spending the past hour with us. It was our pleasure, and I will get this recording out to everyone in the next day or so.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Happy training.
Thank you.